Let me come to you first, Jack. What explains the pace of the Ukrainian advance?
I think it's just the weakness of the Russian defenses when talking to Ukrainian and American officials. What they saw as they approached these positions with wheeled offensive attacks, something that the Ukrainians didn't have on their arsenal on February 24th, were Rosguardia, police Spetsnaz, people who had been trained up very, very quickly to fight and were prepared to fight. So instead of really facing a toe-to-toe battle here, the Ukrainians saw a lot of these folks just withdrawing from their lines, collapsing as they advanced, especially as the Russians couldn't really do a one-for-one and hold both sides of the battlefield in the midst of this southern advance that the Ukrainians have also been working on. So we've really seen just a collapse of these Russian forces, a collapse of Russian personnel, and it's going to be difficult to see how the Russians will be able to make up that ground until January as Putin begins that mobilization of over 130,000 more troops.
And Jack, is that inevitable, that given the losses that they've sustained, Russia has to get into a conscription model?
It could be so. I mean, certainly they've already announced the plans to mobilize 130,000 more folks. Putin, of course, and the Russian leadership have stepped aside from a general mobilization because this is very politically tricky.
Yep.
If they actually do declare a general mobilization, this steps away from being the special operation that the Kremlin has very carefully tailored and leans into more of a full-scale war, which could be politically costly for the Kremlin at home. So if Putin decides to do that, he has to weigh that very carefully against the needs of the Russian public and the possible backlash if more Russian troops are coming home in caskets.
Jack, there's been talk about the attack on Kherson in the south for more than a month now, and of course it is happening. But is it just enough to say that, look, the Russians truly bought the Ukrainian ploy of getting them to redeploy their forces to the south of the country, abandon positions in the east, or make them weaker by moving forces down? Or is this a failure of Russian satellites to see, intelligence on the ground failing, soldiers having morale which is very low, and equipment losses?
The Ukrainians insist this wasn't a bluff, that they were actually pushing on both fronts. What seemed to have happened, though, was as the losses got more intense in the south, as this became a more entrenched artillery battle, and the Russians really had to reinforce those lines after sustaining the HIMARS assault from the U.S. guns that were provided to the Ukrainians, the artillery assault, eventually it just seemed to become too much to manage, and we saw that collapse. But this was very, very carefully planned between the Ukrainians, American and British officials. The Ukrainians, of course, have always wanted to go further. The Americans, the Brits, the Europeans have been urging caution. But here it seems like the Ukrainians ran into a situation where the defenses were so weak. They were really able to push very far, very quickly, and just a much more skilled military than what we saw back in February.
Yep.